Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and I want to ask you whether you think your government ought to ever intervene in another country and try to unseat a ruler that we think is not doing a good job or shouldn't be there. Because this is an issue that haunts me, and I haven't got an answer for it. I have partial answers. I'm thinking about it a lot. But I want to talk to somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about it, and that is Dr. Maciej Bartkowski, who is the Senior Director of Education and Research at an outfit called the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. And he's in his office in Washington, D.C. Say hi, Maciej.
Yes, hello, everyone.
I want to mention a couple of the books that you have either edited or written. I'm not sure which is which. The first one is your Recovering Nonviolent History, Civil Resistance in Liberation Struggles and Decision-Making. And the other is a topic that right now intrigues me especially, Nonviolent Civil Defense to Counter Russian Hybrid Warfare. Aha! Now we're getting down to the social media war, cyber war by disinformation, right? So hi, tell us what you do there in that beautiful office with that lovely plant I see behind you.
Thank you, Meta. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name is Maciej Bartkowski. I'm Senior Director for Education and Research at the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict, which is a private, non-profit operating foundation, educational foundation based in Washington, D.C. And in a nutshell, what we do, we basically develop and encourage the study and use of nonviolent, non-military strategies that are aiming at establishing and defending human rights, democratic self-rule, and social justice. And basically, we study human rights-based movements and campaigns that are taking place around the world and fighting for different type of social, political, economic causes. And we want to better understand what makes them effective.
Civil resistance can be used in many ways, and it can be used for harmful things theoretically. If somebody came to you and wanted to figure out how to do some harm to somebody else, what would you say?
Well, we would, and I would not work with such groups. Basically, yes, they are nefarious actors, and they could be state actors, it could be dictators that basically understood the power of nonviolent organizing and nonviolent resistance, and they want to either understand that even deeper or in fact deploy certain nonviolent actions to their advantage. And of course, the first question would be to what extent what one does advances human rights, and to what extent the campaign is representative of the grievances as well as the kind of community that it wants to represent.
Yeah, there are marginal cases where you're not sure which side you should be on, theoretically. Okay, right from the beginning, we're going to get to this later, I think, and it's not fair to toss in Venezuela from the start, but I would say half of the people I know nowadays, my peace friends, are on the side of Maduro, and the other half are on the side of Guaido, or whatever his name is, the insurrection, or the nonviolent resistors. And, so here's a case where you can have a real debate about who's right and who's wrong, and whether or not you should help anybody who's a protester. Okay, I don't want, I'm throwing you right into the deep end.
That's okay. That's okay, Meta. No problem. Right. I think in terms of the kind of external actors looking into the situation on the ground in another country, where that situation has dire economic, social, and political consequences for the population living there. I think that the first, if then they see certain organizing, certain mobilization coming from the grassroots and from ordinary people, I think the first thing is really to ask yourself how we, by trying to do something, how we will avoid creating a greater harm for the people, and particularly for those campaigns and movements that are emerging. And in order to answer this question, one needs to be aware of the dangers, potential dangers, by kind of intervening in the situations where those campaigns are emerging. And I think one danger that dictatorships are very often exploiting is the issue of the loss of legitimacy by those grassroots when there is certain external intervention, even with the kind of good intentions. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's often what is also what something that needs to be kept in mind when we develop or we plan certain kind of assistance to nonviolent movements. So first of all, not to harm and not to jeopardize, undermine legitimacy, and then being aware that the dictators are always using the fact that those external actors might be trying to provide certain aid as a way to delegitimize the movement as not being grassroots, as not being authentic, as being kind of foreign-led, basically, movement. And and I think on a basic level, the responsibility of international community and both state and non-state actors is to emphasize all the time the non-violent, the need for a non-violent discipline on the part of the campaigns and movements. One needs to kind of carefully observe how the movement is trying to win greater legitimacy among the people, which one would look into the cohesion of the movement, the diversity of the participants and coalitions within the movement, and whether this type of kind of coalitions, this diversity and the participation we see over time is increasing. And there are more people that may have been before neutral or on the side joining the movement, and a number of prominent allies of the regime or members of the security forces are starting kind of shifting their perception about the situation in the country and who they should in fact support. And if we see those trends, this is also indicative, I think, for the external actors that things are going in favor of those nonviolent movements that are pushing for democratic change. And the discussion can ensue how else those external actors can provide what kind of different type of aid, not necessarily only material-based aid, different external actors can provide. On our end, we always think that one of the best type of assistance for those groups that are struggling for democracy and human rights is to connect them with one another, meaning connect, for example, current activists that are engaged in different campaigns in different parts of the world with one another, as well as with the veterans of successful nonviolent movements who can share the experience of how they managed to achieve those successes.
Normally, when I have a conversation about civil resistance, we're talking about trying to reach and work with people who already have a well-developed argument and following in the country that we're talking about, whatever country. Now, I think one of the real problems today is that there's simply a need to raise the level of awareness about certain global threats all over the place. And I'm thinking, for example, of this lovely 16-year-old girl now from Sweden who is going around getting kids to skip school in protest against their parents and their teachers and their governments who are not doing enough to correct the challenges of climate change. Now that is starting at a lower level. This is saying we have to make you people aware enough to even form a social movement, because there isn't a social movement really. When I try to contact people who are climate change activists, to be honest, I have a very slim list of people to call. They're, I don't know them. They don't know each other. There are some people, but it's not much of a movement, really. So we have to create a movement from the get-go. And that means consciousness raising, maybe in another country or all around the world. Personally, I don't think countries, I'm not in favor of having too many boundaries between countries. That's a whole other issue that we could talk about, is sovereignty and the need to respect the laws of other countries and the sovereignty of other countries. But let's talk about the first, how we get people interested in and angry enough to participate in a social movement, when in fact they tend to look around and see nobody else doing it, and they take their time.
This is basically a question of movement or campaigns emergence, and there are different probably historical examples one can refer to address this question. On a very basic level, what we see is the importance of the kind of nucleus group, and those dissidents oftentimes would operate on the level of the kind of discourse and ideas, not necessarily planning and strategizing, but they are preparing the groundwork for possible kind of movement, but they need to then get help from organizers, experienced organizers, and that can then think about to go beyond the ideas and kind of normative discourse or ideational discourse about the need for change, and because of the situation that people are struggling with, they need to operationalize that, and their task is basically to come up with with specific defined goals for yet to be launched campaign that represents basically overall grievances. And to be more kind of precise, in the context, I'm originally from Poland, and when prior to the emergence of the Solidarity movement, there were a number of protests, both led by workers and separately by intellectuals at different historical times in Poland, starting from the end of the Second World War. But their demands were either kind of very economic, or in fact they were very general, kind of let's fight for democracy, open political pluralistic system. And what one thing that happened in the 1970s, which made that organizing much more focused, was that's what those dissidents and activists were saying. We of course want to struggle for democracy. This is the kind of end goal for us, but it's very elusive. We don't know whether that democracy will come even in our lifetimes. So
and you have the problem of what does it look like when you got it, and do you know how much of a democracy do you have, and all of that.
Yeah, so then it would be like
make it more specific.
People would get distracted by what is democracy, how would that, how the political kind of power will be distributed. It's kind of goes back. I mean, one gets down to details, and it's stuck. So basically, what first they did, they turned the rhetoric of the government to its advantage. The basic rhetoric, of the communist regime in Poland was that the working class was the vanguard of the society, and it's kind of was the bedrock of the society. So the workers' class kind of came back to the government and asked, well, if we are such an important social class, why we don't have such a very specific right, which probably one would expect from the class that it's considered to be such a leading force in the society, why we don't have a simple right for independent type of association. to organize ourselves
Right.
independently of the government and registered basically that association. So what they did together with dissidents and intellectuals, they came up with a specific goal. We want to have a free trade union. We are again this vanguard class that doesn't even have a simple right for independent organizing. So they didn't ask for democracy. They didn't ask for freedom, complete freedom of media and lack of censorship. They ask, for a right to organize, and this in fact put them on the path of the kind of mobilization. And this right to to a free trade union of course, complemented very nicely and linked very nicely with kind of fight for democratic rights, but was very specific in its form. And
I love that.
One can argue that you know, in all those campaigns, successful campaigns, coming up with the goal that is very easily defined, that is representing overall struggle that can be connected with other issues and problems, and that is also kind of has a specific time frame to be achieved. And we know whether that will be achieved or not, whether we will register that free trade union or not. You know, whether we achieve democracy, it's very elusive as well in its form. So it has usually, you know, a specific time frame. It's concrete, specific. It's achievable in that sense. So this defining the goal becomes one of the key elements for starting the resistance. But you know, apart from defining the goal, yes, this ideational change, which I would just to kind of end on that, it's as important as defining the goal. And this ideational change, when I studied campaigns and movements, comes with the kind of simple understanding that when people are passive and not awakened, they basically see the problem that they are experiencing as being kind of completely a part of them, that it's not really part of me. This is the problem created by others. And for example, in that case, if it's the government that creates and sustains this problem, repression, and I cannot do anything about that. But when we see the change is in a moment when people start understanding that perhaps that problem exists because of what we do or what we don't do. And oftentimes this is the second, what we don't do. And because of our inaction, because of our kind of complacency, this problem persists. And then with the realization that we might be part of the problem, in fact, rather than completely separate from that problem, comes also the next higher level of kind of cognitive awakening, which is if we are part of the problem, perhaps we could be part of the solution. And then comes, and so this is this kind of cognitive liberation that one can talk about, from recognizing that we are part of the problem to recognizing that we might be part of the solution. And then the question would be, what kind of strategies are required, in fact, to come up with, you know, challenging that problem and becoming part of the solution. And then we come to kind of strategic type of non-violent organizing that may start from defining campaign goal and defining strategies and defining appropriate non-violent tactics.
Okay, beautiful. I love this. You got it almost sequential. I don't know whether you mean that they need to be sequential. In other words, the goal setting has to come, the specification of goals needs to come pretty early on. And then the sense of awareness of the fact that it's our responsibility and that everybody can participate. And then the strategies of how we're going to do it. Would you see that as actually occurring in different stages, or do they all tend to happen at the same time?
I think it differs. You know, I'm thinking about Gandhi and how he came up with the Salt March. Again, very specific, you know, campaign goal to defy the British monopoly on salt. Not abstract, very defined, very concrete. We know where would that lead, whether it would be kind of implemented or not. And again, you see, the whole march was the education of the Indians about well, the need for unity, the need to challenge the British non-violently, and they need to join that campaign. So this march that took place over a couple of weeks was the kind of education itself, the awareness raising. But before, for example, Gandhi had to educate himself. A number of years he was basically traveling around India in order to come up with this defined objective. So sometimes one needs to, and we see that in places like Russia, more kind of in places that are closed, that campaigns, could be flash mobs, could be kind of one-day-long campaigns, could be a couple of weeks campaigns. They either arise because something terrible happened, let's say fire in the mall that aggravated people that lost their loved ones, or basically there was something,
I'm sorry, did you say Russia? Are you talking about Russia now?
Well, yes, I touch on just, as an example that there are a number of small campaigns around Russia that would be, linked to environmental issues.
Like currently.
Yes, and that would be kind of small type of mobilizations of local citizens around local issues, and those campaigns themselves are educational experience, both educating and kind of for activists to gain experience in organizing, but educating that local public about specific issues. So because you ask about the sequencing, and I think that it differs. Sometimes, yes, there's a groundwork, like in Poland, prepared by both intellectuals and workers, the kind of liberation of the mindset through, some is that through the kind of free, uncensored press, through information that was coming from Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, and so people were getting that information, and then they kind of start planning more kind of concrete, significant campaign, and even changing strategies and tactics. Instead of going on the streets, in fact occupying factories, which was much more effective way to put pressure on the government and even decrease the possibility of repression by people staying in a kind of gated place. It was much more difficult for the government to repress. So this kind of came sequentially a bit, but in other places those campaigns may start before even kind of awareness is present, precisely because they are designed to create that greater awareness.
Okay, let's go back to the early part where you're talking about setting goals and making clear, very specific goals, because I think that we're at a phase now where even the goal setting hasn't been established well enough so as to develop the kind of unity and cohesion that a movement needs. And that's why, to be a bit self-serving here in our conversation, because I'm representing something called the Project Save the World, which is something that I came up with a year or so ago, with the notion that what we need is exactly to set very specific and finite list of goals that need to be adopted so as to reduce the risk of actually quite a few major threats to humankind. There are at least 6 that I know of right now. War and weapons, which is what, nuclear disarmament is the thing I've done mostly. Then we have global warming, which is obviously equally threatening. We have famines, we have pandemics, the possibility of a flu epidemic or something of that kind. We have major radiation exposure from something like a Chernobyl or Fukushima or something worse. And we have cyber attacks now. And all of those need to have goals made much more concrete and specific, such that you can tell whether they've been done or not. You can tell for sure. It's not like talking about democracy. You can see whether they've actually enacted this particular goal or not. So they need to be specific. And so we came up with a list of 25 specific goals that all could fit on one piece of paper. And I would love to see us all work toward, and we tried to do this in a democratic way by having people at a meeting and discuss these things and come up with their own list. So that is, I think, extremely important to have it formulated now so that at least, and there are people elsewhere that are doing similar things. In Canada, we have a group of people who have created something called the LEAP Manifesto. That's Naomi Klein and her friends. I have a friend in New Zealand who has, I've forgotten the name of hers, but it's a climate change list of specific objectives and goals. And now there's the Green New Deal in the US, which is fairly specific and concrete. Seems to me that the formulation and adoption of a common set of goals would be an extremely important thing to do right now, to try as a step toward moving people into creating a social movement, not just to solve the nuclear weapons issues, but also the climate change and all of these other real threats to humankind. So I that's why I reacted kind of emotionally when you use this word goal setting, because it seemed to me that's maybe the stage that we need to focus on now. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that even the whole exercise of setting goals, it's as important as then the goal itself and its implementation. But on a general level, what one needs to probably emphasize in that kind of goal setting is that that goal setting, both the process as well as the goal itself, should dramatize the injustice that we see. It should kind of elevate the visibility of that injustice to others, that goal has potential to help us win other supporters and other allies, and that goal again can be linked easily to other problems. In other words, this specific campaign goal and the campaign itself can spawn other campaigns relatively fast. And so even if this campaign might not be maybe visibly successful, there is a chance that it creates and paves the way for others to step in with other types of campaigns. So yes, one cannot emphasize enough the importance of the both the process of goal setting as well as the kind of coming up with the goals that are defined, visible, and very concrete, very specific, in order then to be, to see all the kind of related things that I just mentioned about once this campaign moves on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you also mentioned something about the Salt March, which is, of course, key. The question is, how do you get people conscious of the injustices that they're facing, and develop the notion that yes, it's our problem and we can do something about it and we should all participate. Let me share something that we're working on. I'm trying to help with something. You may have, when you were here in Toronto a couple of years ago, you probably met a woman named Jill Carr Harris, who is a Gandhian working. She's a Canadian living in India for the last 30 years and is married to an organizer, a Gandhian organizer named Raja Gopal, who in fact about in 2012 organized a march of almost 100,000 landless peasants across India going to Delhi to protest against the fact that their land was being taken from them rather than the Minister of Agriculture or somebody came out to meet them because they didn't want 100,000 people arriving in New Delhi at the same time, and gave them what they wanted. So they won. And right now what they're doing is organizing a new campaign. They're going to start on October the 2nd in New Delhi at Gandhi's grave. It is the 150th anniversary, his birthday, 150 years ago when Gandhi was born. They will start a march to Geneva, which will take them a year. And they expect to have about 50 people who are going the whole way and another 100 people who will come and go. And, there'll be times when there'll be 500 or more people. And they'll get to Geneva a year later. and spend 8 days together in Geneva. They will be met by people marching from Scandinavia, from France, from North Africa, from a variety of people, places. And believe it or not, apparently the people in Geneva, who are normally pretty dignified and reserved people, the Genevans are not famous for being firebrands by any means, but there's apparently a lot of enthusiasm in Geneva to welcome these people. So I just love the notion that we could take their march across the world practically through, they have to actually take vehicles when they're going to be in Pakistan and Iran because, politics are a little difficult. But otherwise they'll be marching. And they will walk through places like Abkhazia, and we hope Sochi in Russia, have peace conferences along the way, talking about peace issues, talking about sustainable development goals, talking about all of the challenges that the world faces. And if we use that, we can make them kind of a symbol of what the rest of us are trying to do in terms of mobilizing public awareness and public engagement with the tremendous threats that we all face today. What do you think?
Well, it's a noble cause and noble undertaking, and the one of the most important things is naturally to popularize the whole campaign. And I think the marches are excellent idea to do that, because I mean that also reminds me of in one of documentaries that my organization released in 2000 was A Force More Powerful, which is in fact right now available freely on our website. And one of the campaigns that is covered there is Nashville campaign against segregation in the town, and the campaign of the campaign that was launched to desegregate lunch counters. But one of the tactics during that campaign was a march of students to the mayor's office, and they started with a couple of hundreds and then reached by the time they reached the mayor's office there were in thousands that forced mayor to come out and speak with those protesters. Naturally that march in fact happened at the end of the campaign. That started from the lunch counter sitting to boycott of the downtown Nashville, to engaging in any kind of awareness raising among black and white population of the town to basically join or support the nonviolent actions. And here, probably again, the question is to what extent they in fact have also prepared prior to launching the march what will be happening in order to not only kind of make the march known, but all the kind of sequencing that are leading to that march as a culmination perhaps of the overall campaign. Basically the march forced mayor to recognize that segregation in the downtown Nashville is pure injustice and should be in fact removed. And that was kind of, he initially as a mayor, he didn't support of course the campaign. He was in fact talking about rule of law and order in the city, and that is disturbed, that is right now somehow challenged by those campaigners. That was at the beginning of the campaign. And closer to the end, that culminated with that march, he changed his view. And now that change happened under the pressure. So in other words, it's not enough to just walk, I think, oftentimes, in order to, naturally that kind of march, again, if we talk about advocacy and education down the road, but it has to be like Gandhian Salt March. Gandhian Salt March was also about putting pressure. I mean,
Mm.
by defying, disobeying something, which was in that case the law. Well, in the case of the Nashville, that march, behind that march, there was already pressure accumulating on the specific opponents, which was through the boycott of the downtown, businesses that increased costs for the white businesses. Again, the arrests and the violence against activists that backfired and mobilized more people, put kind of Nashville on the national spotlight and increased sympathy for the activists. So there was pressure basically building on the I guess on the target of the campaign itself.
You say that there was also a boycott of businesses. Was that an essential ingredient to this thing? Was that the crucial thing? What do you think?
Well, if we talk about Nashville, yes, it was crucial. That doesn't mean that in other contexts, just boycott will be the decisive element. It was crucial because of the businesses and that were impacted. But also that boycott couldn't have happened if activists would have called for a boycott when they started campaign. In fact, the Black community in Nashville was kind of demobilized. They were living under repression for decades, centuries, and they kind of accepted it. They thought this is a problem, but we are not part of the problem. And it took those very targeted lunch counter sittings, and then kind of repression against those young, well-dressed, well-behaved activists that were sitting in those lunch counters when they were, arrested or beaten up by hooligans. That actually created backfire and galvanized the Black community. And only with this kind of and also magnified the injustice and kind of directly brought that injustice home to the Black community. And that Black community was mobilized, and energy of that mobilization, that was the next of the strategic step of the campaign was, okay, we've got right now awakened community, what can we do about that? So one of the things would be, okay, we don't ask them maybe necessary to go out and protest, that might be still risky, they might still have certain inhibitions, but how about, we ask them not to do shopping in the downtown Nashville, which would be simple, you just stay home, you just avoid the downtown. And that's what happened. Now, again, the boycotts is one of the indeed most powerful arsenal of nonviolent methods, nonviolent tactics in the repertoire of civil resistance that is oftentimes used. But it a lot depends on the sequence when that happens. Depends on the really target. How key those business community are for the regime or for the kind of system. And this is only perhaps one of the targets of the campaign, depending on its goal. Again, I'm not familiar with the march that you described, that from India to Geneva. It seems like this is an awareness rising in the context of a kind of climate issue, using
several issues: the Sustainable Development Goals and peace.
Right. So then again, peace. Peace is like democracy. It's such an elusive target. For a campaign.
Nuclear disarmament is, to
that's
my
a very
mind,
specific,
much clearer goal.
Yes. In fact, one can argue
or
that
demilitarization. If we say cut back on military spending, that's a fairly specific goal. You can tell whether it's been done or not.
Yeah, I mean, the denuclearization, I think one of the most successful movements in the United States was the denuclearization movement that focused on basically shutting down and preventing opening of new nuclear power stations in the United States in 70s and 80s. And it was one of the most successful movements in the history of kind of civic organizing. So yes, the specificity of the target or the campaign would be important, but I would highlight the fact that, I mean, the civil resistance campaigns, march is either to put pressure, or in fact, it's part of a repertoire of actions that have already generated certain pressure on the target groups.
Okay, there are two different things I want to discuss before we give up on this. And one has to do with the general question of regime change. That's a nasty little slogan I don't like, but I have had arguments with peace friends of mine about whether or not it's ever suitable for an elected democratic government to try to do something to make a dictatorial or authoritarian regime change its ways or be supplanted by a democratic regime, whether or not it's okay to interfere in the affairs of another country. And I've always said yes, because it's always been, I want my country to just look for what is right and what is wrong and defend people who need to be defended. And I know that, you know, if, for example, a country is enslaved, they're not in a position to get their own freedom very well, and they need to have outsiders help them. So I feel, you know, I'm up for that. But at the same time, you know, when we see the shoe being on the other foot, if we see efforts, say, on the part of let's be frank, Putin and his team to interfere in the politics of our own government, and I'm half American. I'm both a U.S. and Canadian citizen. So I feel strongly that, you know, I want to be careful not to allow that kind of manipulation. So I don't know where the line exists. My other friends who are peace activists all along have said, I don't want any of my governments or any government that I have anything to do with to actually officially try to unsettle another country's rulership, governance. And it should only be done by non-governmental organizations, by civil society, by private individuals. If you want to have a support groups of individuals who are foreigners, that's okay, but certainly the government shouldn't do it. So there are several different issues all tied in together there. And certainly I have not seen a proper analysis or thinking through of the question of where it's appropriate for a democratic regime to intervene in another country's politics. I do know, of course, there's the responsibility to protect doctrine, which has fluctuating legitimacy, I would say, depending on whose ox is being gored at any one moment in time. But at any rate, the principle was discussed there, and that was that some sort of international action should legitimately be undertaken against a regime that was failing to protect or was actively oppressing its own citizens. And so the principle, the general principle, was at least discussed, although I think the outcome was that the whole notion of the responsibility to protect doctrine is that it's okay to use violence to unseat another regime if it's doing bad things. I don't know that we want to go there, but the general question of whether it would be okay to non-violently do so, and if so, by what means? Because now you've talked about, the title of your book had something to do with, what is it? Hybrid warfare, where you can see the Russians trying to intervene in other countries by using disinformation campaigns and that sort of thing. So I've opened the door for a big conversation that we only have 5 to 10 minutes for it.
Sure. You may, Meta, recall, during our seminar at the University of Toronto that you hosted, I did have a presentation where I briefly referred to the concept that my colleagues here at the center, Peter Ackerman and Hardy Merriman, are developing, and they would be soon releasing a publication on that. So this is kind of forthcoming. I talked about the concept of the right to assist and right to be assisted, or right to ask for, and this is kind of linking that with your last kind of idea of the responsibility to protect. Indeed, the responsibility to protect, as we all know, has been effectively or ineffectively, used in a number of cases, and was a kind of established normative principle, be it regardless whether people agree with that or not. But basically, the problem with that is that it's very state-centric in its form, and oftentimes, the last resort of responsibility to protect is, in fact, to protect people with violence. Yeah. and arms as a last resort, and oftentimes that's what we would see in Libya, for example, and
where? Libya.
Yeah. So arguably, this principle is very, again, a kind of state-centric, based on the kind of diplomatic tools and then eventually military tools if other things fail. And my colleagues are emphasizing that there might be, well, first there might be a need as well as even space to start conversation shifting from the responsibility to protect to the right to assist. Specifically people that are mobilized, because responsibility to protect also assumes that people are weak, they are victims, they are powerless, and we oftentimes would see that those victims can be in fact powerful. I mean, power of the powerless that Václav Havel was writing about. It's an interesting construct. Right now, I think the bar is to introduce the concept of right to assist. In other words, because right to assist then focuses discussion on, okay, if there is such a right that external actors, be it state or non-state actors, have a right to assist peaceful, non-violently organized, movements and campaigns, then what kind of assistance would be effective? Well, not probably arms, and not necessarily, financial assistance. What are other type of assistance? And then also my colleagues are talking about, right to be assisted, that campaigns and movements who are remaining non-violent, they should have kind of international community support to ask for the assistance, and then the international community has right, and who knows, maybe we could talk about responsibility to respond to those requests for specific assistance.
Okay, what would that look like? Are you asking for a new institution or just a general theory that people should somehow be organized enough to officially ask for help?
Yeah. I will not speak.
If we want to help people, and we can cherry pick, and we can find some little subgroup that is really nothing, just somebody we like, but they're a tiny, tiny group of people, would you say that there's a right to assist those, or do they have to have a certain mass before they are entitled to be taken seriously? And I go back to the case of dictatorships in which the vast majority of the population love their dictator. Do you have then the right to assist people a tiny handful of people who don't love their dictator?
Right. I mean, the counter argument to that is that how well we know the preferences of the people who are, in fact, living in dictatorship. Who says that they love dictatorship? I mean, is that the polling that the dictator himself kind of organized and is showing to us how precise we can be saying that they love dictator.
Well,
even they are not going to protest. It's not indicative that they might love the dictatorship. So, but let's assume that indeed, the problem of the expressing the true preferences is somehow resolved, and we know indeed that they are quite happy living without rights and with whatever good and bad things they have. Naturally, again, with the principle of even the not to do harm, that principle would indicate that we should listen first to the voices of the grassroots. And again, some of those voices might be of those single dissidents that are pointing to the fact, to the uncomfortable truth, inconvenient truth to the dictator about the situation, and they are single because of the repression that others are so afraid of, that prevents others to speak up. And with those principles, we are. And again, I don't want to speak to my colleagues. It would be the soon released report on that would speak for itself. But my kind of vision for the right to assist and right to be assisted could be based on and that would come to your question of who can ask for that, of certain even what my colleague talks about, or both of them, a kind of checklist that we checked. Basically, whoever is asking for the type of assistance, that the international community has a checklist. Whether this person or this movement or this campaign, again, it's committed to non-violent kind of stance, committed to non-violent actions. Whether, again, there is certain unity behind both the goals, the methods, and certain maybe leadership, and whether there is also certain capacity to implement campaigns that are likely to bring about more participation, greater diversity of participants. So those type of questions, and whether what exactly those goals are of this campaign. Okay, they might be committed to non-violent resistance, but what are the human rights goals that they have? And then the reaction of the government, whether the government allows those non-violent activists to go out without facing immediate administrative or any other type of more violent type of repression. And this would provide probably quite a lot of information for the international community to evoke a right to assist.
So this, you're thinking of it as kind of an official international committee, so that it needs to be kind of legitimated by some institution. Is that what you're saying? Or
well, it's like with the responsibility to protect. There is no really a commission that would exist permanently. Would advise UN Security Council on the actions. It's basically a group of committed scholars, educators, practitioners, civil society groups, human rights defenders, and human rights groups that would provide the information and input to generate pressure. And then, of course, diplomatic missions. And I mean, we cannot ignore that those diplomats are. A lot of them are human rights kind of conscious and driven in their work. All these groups would generate the type of thinking and pressure. But indeed, it was Canada that was advancing the concept of responsibility to protect by setting up the commission to discuss that came up with principles. And I think that eventually, if the discussion about the right to assist is accepted within specific intellectual, diplomatic, civil society group circles, in fact, a commission could be established to define that even more precisely and define its terms and boundaries, which then can inform even the court rulings domestically, internationally, or inform the discussion among the policy makers regarding the actions in situations of when population is repressed by its own leaders.
Okay, well, this, I think we've got to finish, but I think this is a really beautiful thing to have started, the notion, and I'm really looking forward to it. You say it's Hardy Merriman and Peter Ackerman they'll be publishing something terrific, because that, I think, is the debate that we need to have generated, and the concept of right to assist is a fine one. You know, I didn't get to the third topic I wanted to discuss with you, so we have to come back another day, because I really would love to hear your thoughts further on what I think is, to me, also a terrible problem, and that is management of censorship, or how you handle disinformation campaigns, fake news, foreign trolls out of a St. Petersburg internet factory and things of that kind. It's a huge controversy, and even all my Russian friends deny that it's even a problem, that they don't even think it could be possible. But I think it's real, and I think we have to think about it. And right now, I have already been censored by Facebook because I live in a different country. I want to publicize my talks like this. They may say that I can't boost this video that we're making now in the US because I live in a different country and this is a controversial political issue. And I don't like the idea that people living in each country have to be segregated in terms of their discourse, that only people living in a given country are allowed to discuss a political or global issue. I think we're a global society and many of our problems are global in scope, just as you and I are having conversations in different countries. So I'm very alarmed about that, but we have no time at all to even go into it except to say, I hope to get back to you, Maciej, and let's have another conversation with maybe some other folks who are worried about the same thing, okay?
Sure, no problem. Anytime, Meta. And I was very happy to join that conversation. It was very interesting, engaging, and if you receive any comments related to our discussion, please share with me. And I look forward to being in touch and hopefully, recording another type of video with you in the future.
By the way, feel free to put this on your own web, your own site too at ICNC if you want to, because I may not be able to publicize it in the US. You may have to do it for me. Because here you are, a Polish, Canadian, American discourse.
Exactly.
Okay, bless your heart. Thank you so much. And we'll be in touch. Okay, bye, Maciej.
Bye.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.